Hello and welcome to another episode of the Symphonic podcast. My name is Bernardo, Miethe, and with me as always is...
Andrew Owen.
And this time it's real.
Yes, I do.
It's real.
This whole time I've been a fictional character.
Yeah, he's been in the Matrix, but now we took him out. And well, we're here in Chattanooga, Tennessee, enjoying beautiful day.
Oh, yes.
And ACDA happening right now.
That is it, the American Choral Directors Association.
And you're performing tonight?
Yes, we are performing the Hymnus Paradisi tonight over at the Tivoli Theater, so it should be lots of fun.
Awesome, dude. And well, I chose Rachmaninoff actually because he died in Tennessee. I didn't even know that he died in this state. Well, he didn't die here. His last concert ever performed was here. Well,
Which
in Chattanooga.
Basically like dying.
Yeah, it was basically, yeah, for him, yeah. But yeah, his last concert was actually in Knoxville. And so, I want to talk about him. And we haven't talked about him, so we're going to talk about him, of course. So, Sergei Rachmaninoff, how do you say his second name, middle name?
Well, his middle name is Vasilyevich.
Vasilyevich.
Sergei Vasilyevich Rachmaninoff.
Rachmaninoff. And of course, as you can tell, he's Russian, or he's got the Russian stuff going on.
Oh, sure, yeah.
He was born in 1873, and he died in 1943. He was a Russian composer, of course, pianist and conductor. Rachmaninoff is widely considered one of the finest pianists of all time, and as a composer, one of the last great representatives of Romanticism in Russian classical music.
Oh, yes.
Early influences, of course, are Tchaikovsky and Korsakov, no doubt about that, and other Russian composers gave way to a personal style notable for its song-like melodicism, expressiveness, and his use of rich orchestral colors. The piano is featured prominently in Rachmaninoff's compositions, and through his own skills as a performer, he explored the expressive possibilities of this instrument.
Yeah, so that... I guess that brings us to his biography. Might as well throw some of that. So the Rachmaninoff family was of Russian and of distant Moldavian descent. Moldavian. Well, he was a part of the Russian aristocracy, having been in the service of the Russian Tsar since the 16th century, and had strong musical and military leanings. The composer's father, Vasily Arkadyevich Rachmaninoff, he was an amateur pianist and an army officer who married this woman named Lyubov Petrovna Butakova. Butakov. So the two of them gained 5 estates as a dowry and had 3 boys and 3 girls. They're basically Catholic in their output. So Sergei was born on the 1st of April, 1873. He was one of the first April Fool's jokes in all of Russian music history. He was there at the estate of Semyonovo in Onek, near the great Novgorod in northwestern Russia, one of the lesser-known parts of Russia, not very full of bustle or hustle.
And when Rachmaninoff was 4 years old, his mother gave him casual piano lessons, but it was his paternal grandfather, Arkady Alexandrovich, who brought Anna, a teacher from St. Petersburg, to teach Sergei in 1882. His teacher, Anna, remained for 2 or 3 years until Vasily had to auction off their home due to his financial incompetence. The 5 estates had been reduced to 1. He was described as a wastrel, a compulsive gambler, a pathological liar, and a skirt chaser. And they moved to a small flat in St. Petersburg.
Not a great thing for your father to be known as.
Yeah.
So Ornatskaya returned to her home and arranged for Sergei to study at the St. Petersburg Conservatory, which he entered at in 1883 at the age of 10. That year, his sister Sophia died of diphtheria, and his father left the family with their approval for Moscow. Sergei's maternal grandmother stepped in to help raise the children, especially focusing on their spiritual life. She regularly took Sergei to Russian Orthodox masses to expose him to spiritual life there, where he was first exposed to the liturgical chants and the church bells of the city, which would later permeate many of his compositions, something he certainly would not have had the opportunity to do had he been born in the Soviet Union, which was later to come in the 1910s.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Another important musical influence was his sister Yelena's involvement in the Bolshoi theater. She was just about to join the company, being offered coaching and private lessons, but she fell ill and died of pernicious anemia at the age of 18. As a respite from this tragedy, the grandmother Butakova brought him to a farm retreat on the Volkhov River, where he had a boat and developed a love for rowing. Having been spoiled in his way by his grandmother, he became lazy and failed his general education classes, altering his report cards in what Korsakov would later call a period of, quote, purely Russian self-delusion and laziness, unquote. So Korsakov didn't think too well of him at first.
Well, you know. The later people would find the error of their ways. I'm kidding. So in 1885, back at the conservatory, Sergei played at important events, often attended by Grand Duke Konstantin and other important people. But he failed those spring academic examinations that he was taking, and Ornatskaya notified his mother that his admission might be revoked. So Lyubov consulted with her nephew by marriage, Alexandru Siloti, already an accomplished pianist studying under Franz Liszt. After appraising his cousin's pianism and listening skills, Siloti recommended that Sergei attend the Moscow Conservatory to study with his own original teacher and disciplinarian, Nikolai Zvyerev.
Mm-hmm. Good way to start. Okay. Neighboring families will come to visit, and Rachmaninoff would find his first romance in the Skalon family with Vera, the youngest of 3 daughters. The mother would have none of that, and he was forbidden to write to her, so he corresponded with her older sister, Natalia, and from these letters, much information about his early compositions can be extracted. In the spring of 1891, he took his final piano examinations at the conservatory, Moscow Conservatory, and passed with honors. He moved to Ivanovka with Siloti and composed some songs and began what would become his Piano Concerto No. 1. During his final studies at the conservatory, he completed Youth Symphony, a one-movement symphonic piece, also The Prince Rostislav, a symphonic poem, and The Rock, Opus 7, a fantasia for orchestra. He gave his first independent concert on 1892, premiering his Trio Elegiac No. 1. I think that's how you say it.
Trio Elegiac.
Elegiac, of course, it's French. Trio Elegiac No. 1, with violinist David Krian and cellist Anatoly Bradukov. He performed the first movement of his piano concerto on March of 1892 in an over-long concert consisting of entire works of most of the composition students at the conservatory.
This is a good opportunity to try and to learn how to pronounce some of the most obscure names in Russian.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know a lot of these people.
What happened? What happened, Andrew? We were just together. And now you're over there and I'm over here.
It seems like as a technical glitch, I've changed my attire and you've changed your attire, and we are now in different time zones.
Different time zones. Yeah, my camera had technical issues last week, so we had to postpone the recording. Yeah. But we're going to continue talking about Rachmaninoff, of course. Well, right where we left off.
Yeah, so yeah, his final composition for the conservatory was a one-act opera called Aleko, which is based on the poem The Gypsies by Alexander Pushkin. Rachmaninoff completed this while staying with his father in Moscow. It was first performed in 1892 in May, and although he responded with a pessimistic "the opera is sure to fail," it was so successful the Bolshoi Theater agreed to produce it, starring Fyodor Chalyapin. It gained him the Great Gold Medal, awarded only twice before, one to Sergei Taneyev and Arseny Koreshchenko, and has since had many more productions than his later works, The Miserly Knight and Francesca di Rimini. Mm-hmm. The conservatory issued him a diploma on May 29, 1892, and now, at the age of 19, he could officially style himself, quote, a free artist, unquote, which is apparently a big, something that one can call oneself after you have a diploma.
Yeah. So Rachmaninoff continues to compose, publishing at this time his 6 songs, Opus 4, and his 2 pieces, Opus 2. He spent the summer of 1892 on the estate of Ivan Konovalov, a rich landowner in the Kostroma Oblast, and moved back with the Saints in the Arbat district. His publisher was slow in paying, so Rachmaninoff took an engagement at the Moscow Electrical Exhibition, where he premiered his landmark Prelude in C sharp minor, which is his Opus 3 No. 2, and this small piece, part of a set of 5 pieces called Morceau de Fantaisie, was received well and is one of his most enduring pieces.
Ding, ding, ding. I guess the Prelude in C sharp minor.
Mm-hmm.
I'm pretty sure. So yeah, he spent the summer of 1893 in Lebedyin with some friends, where he composed Fantasie Tableau, Suite No. 1, Opus 5, and his Morceau de Salon, Opus 10. At the summer's end, he moved back to Moscow and at Sergei Tanyeyev's house discussed with Tchaikovsky the possibility of his conducting The Rock at its premiere. However, because it had to be premiered in Moscow, not Europe, where Tchaikovsky was touring, Vasily Safonov conducted it instead. And the two met soon after Zvyerov's funeral, Zvyerev being his old disciplinarian. Old teacher, Rachmaninoff, that is. So Rachmaninoff had a short excursion to conduct Aleko in Kiev, and on his return received the news about Tchaikovsky's unexpected death on the 6th of November of 1893. No one knows why he died. So, which we've talked about this. So on the same day, he began work on his Trio Elegiac, number 2, just as Tchaikovsky had quickly written his trio in A minor after Nikolai Rubinstein's death. So the music, its overwhelming aura of gloom, sort of reveals the depth and sincerity of his grief. One of a long series of eulogy pieces that composers always seem to do for each other.
Yeah. So Rachmaninoff's First Symphony, Opus 13 of 1896, was premiered on 1897, and it's one of a long-running series of Russian symphonic concerts, but was brutally panned by critics and nationalist composer Cesar Cui, who likened it to a depiction of the 10 plagues of Egypt, suggesting it would be admired by inmates of a music conservatory in hell. The deficiencies of the performance, conducted by Alexander Glasunov, were not condemned on by critics. Alexander Ozovsky, in his memoir about Rachmaninoff, tells firsthand a story about this event. In Ozovsky's opinion, Glasunov made poor use of rehearsal time, and the concert program itself, which contained 2 other premieres, was also a factor. Natalia Satina, later Rachmaninoff's wife, and other witnesses suggested that Glasunov, who was by all accounts an alcoholic, may have been drunk, although this was never intimated by Rachmaninoff. So
Rachmaninoff himself was quite fond of booze, as I recall.
Yeah, so Cui didn't like this first performance.
Cui didn't like a lot of things. He was sort of an opinionated dude. So after the poor reception of his first symphony, Rachmaninoff fell into a deep depression that lasted for about 3 years, during which he wrote almost nothing. So one stroke of good fortune came from Sava Mamontov, a famous Russian industrialist and patron of the arts, who 2 years earlier had founded the Moscow Private Russian Opera Company. He offered Rachmaninoff the post of assistant conductor for the 1897 through 8 season, and the cash-strapped composer accepted. This cash-strapped composer, this Rachmaninoff. The company included the great basso Fyodor Chyalyapin, who would become a lifelong friend. During this period, he became engaged to his first cousin and fellow pianist, Natalia Satina, whom he had known since childhood. The Russian Orthodox Church and Natalia's parents both opposed their marriage, and this thwarting of their plans only deepened Rachmaninoff's depression. Poor guy.
Yeah. So in January of 1900, Rachmaninoff and Chaplyapin were invited to Yasnaya Polyana, the home of writer Leo Tolstoy, whom Rachmaninoff greatly admired. That evening, Rachmaninoff played one of his compositions, then accompanied Chaplyapin in his song Fate, one of the pieces he had written after his first symphony. At the end of the performance, Tolstoy took the composer aside and asked, "Is such music needed by anyone? I must tell you how I dislike it all. Beethoven is nonsense, Pushkin and Lermontov also." The song Fate is based on 2 opening measures of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. As his guests were leaving, Tolstoy said, "Forgive me if I've hurt you by my comments." And Rachmaninoff graciously replied, "How could I be hurt by my own account if I was not hurt by Beethoven's?" But the criticism of the great author stung nevertheless.
Poor guy.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I've been thinking about how to pronounce this guy's name, Chelyapin. Turns out it's Chelyapin. Shah rather than Cha. The CH must be through French. Oh, I love languages. So in the same year, Rachmaninoff began a course of autosuggestive therapy with psychologist Nikolai Dahl, who was himself an excellent, though amateur, musician. Rachmaninoff began to recover his confidence, and eventually he was able to overcome his writer's block. And in 1901, he completed his Piano Concerto No. 2 in C minor, Opus 18, and dedicated to Dr. Dahl. The piece was enthusiastically received at its premiere, at which Rachmaninoff was soloist. and has since become one of the most popular and frequently played concertos in the repertoire. I'm halfway between languages. Rachmaninoff's spirits were further bolstered when, after 3 years of engagement, he was finally allowed to marry his cousin and beloved fiancée, Natalia. They were wed at a suburb of Moscow by an army priest in April 29, 1902, using the family's military background to circumvent the church. The marriage was a happy one, producing two lovely incestual daughters, Irina Sergeyevna Rachmaninova, later Princess Volnovsky through her marriage to Prince Pyotr Grigorovich Volkonsky, another person from Moscow, by whom she had a daughter, Princess Sofia Petrovna Volkonskaya, who married firstly on September 28, 1950, Dallas Coors without issue, and married secondly to a Wanamaker, by whom she had two children. So yes, a nice little series of family people coming from there, lots of offspring. So although Rachmaninoff was rumored to have had an affair with a 22-year-old singer Nina Koshets in 1916, his and Natalia's union lasted until the composer's own death. Natalia Rachmaninoff died died in 1951. Semir Schoenberg died. His grandniece Anila, French of Russian descent, married wine merchant Claude Bettel and is the mother of Xavier Bettel, Prime Minister of Luxembourg. So, it's wacky the kinds of people you'll meet on the job. You just run into these random Prime Ministers of Luxembourg.
Yeah, but that piano concerto, the piano concerto number 2 is the most famous, I think, piano concerto that if people are gonna play a concerto, it's gonna be one of those, because it's a really good piece, right? It's a great piece.
Kind of hard.
And I mean, when people think about Rachmaninoff, they think about that piece, the concerto number 2.
It's true.
So, after several successful appearances as a conductor, Rachmaninoff was offered a job as a conductor at the Bolshoi Theater in 1904, although political reasons led to his resignation in March of 1906, after which he stayed in Italy until July. He spent the following 3 winters in Dresden, Germany, intensively composing and returning to the family estate in Ivanovka every summer. Rachmaninoff made his first tour to the United States as a pianist in 1909, an event of which he composed the Piano Concerto No. 3, Opus 30 of 1909, as a calling card. These successful concerts made him a popular figure in America. However, he was unhappy on the tour and declined requests for future American concerts until after he immigrated from Russia in 1917. This included an offer to become permanent conductor of the Boston Symphony Orchestra. He declined that.
Yes. So in 1912, Rachmaninoff quit in protest from his position as the vice president of the Russian Musical Society when he heard that a musician in an administrative post with the organization was to be dismissed on the grounds that the musician was Jewish. Sergei Bertenson, who is one of Rachmaninoff's biographers, writes that Rachmaninoff took his position in society seriously, and for Rachmaninoff, seriously meant with moral as well as artistic seriousness. They were really fused in him, quote unquote, said Sergei Bertenson. So the early death in 1915 of Alexander Scriabin, who had been his good friend and fellow student at the Moscow Conservatory, affected Rachmaninoff so deeply that they went on a tour giving concerts entirely devoted to Scriabin's music, the wacky, theosophical, strange Scriabin. When asked to play some of his own music, he would reply, "Only Scriabin tonight." So he's a person who was very devoted to other people, nice guy.
Yeah. So the 1917 Russian Revolution meant the end of Russia as the composer had known it. Rachmaninoff was a member of the Russian bourgeois, and the revolution led to the loss of his estate, his way of life, and his livelihood. On December 22nd of 1917, he left Petrograd for Helsinki with his wife and 2 daughters on an open sled, having only a few notebooks with sketches of his own compositions and 2 orchestral scores. His unfinished opera, Mona Vanna, and Korsakov's opera, The Golden Cockerel.
What the heck is a cockerel?
I don't know.
Whatever. I don't know why I'm looking at that. Oh, it's a chicken.
a
Makes
chicken,
sense.
the golden chicken. So at this time he was 44 years old. He spent a year giving concerts in Scandinavia while laboring to widen his concert repertoire. Near the end of 1918, he received 3 offers of lucrative American contracts. Although he declined all 3, he decided the United States might offer a solution to his financial concerns. He departed Oslo for New York on November 1st of 1918. Once there, Rachmaninoff quickly chose an agent who was Charles Ellis and accepted the gift of a piano from Steinway before playing 40 concerts in a 4-month period. At the end of the 1919-1920 season, he also signed a contract with the Victor Talking Machine Company, and in 1921, the Rachmaninoff bought a house in the United States where they consciously created the atmosphere of Ivanovka, entertaining Russian guests, employing Russian servants, and observing old Russian customs.
Having their own little Russia there. So he got a nice sponsorship. He got the Wheaties box. He didn't actually get on Wheaties, but he basically on Wheaties. He, Steinweg, later Steinway, and Victor, Victrola record player. So he's very much involved in American musical life there at the beginning of the 20th century. So due to his busy concert career, Rachmaninoff's output as composer slowed tremendously. He was a big performer, didn't write so much. So in the 25 years between 1918 and his death in 1943, while living in the United States and Europe, he completed only 6 compositions. Aside from the need to tour and perform constantly to support himself and his family, the main reason was homesickness. It was during these years that he toured the United States as a concert pianist. When he left Russia, it was as if he had left behind his inspiration. His revival as a composer became possible only after he built himself a new home, Villa Senar, on Lake Lucerne, Switzerland, where he spent many summers from 1932 to 1939. There, in the comfort of his own villa, which reminded him of his old family estate, Rachmaninoff composed a rhapsody on a theme of Paganini, the one that probably his best-known work. Just taking things upside down. He wrote that in 1934. He went on to compose his Third Symphony and the Symphonic Dances, his last completed work. Eugene Ormandy and the Philadelphia Orchestra premiered the Symphonic Dances in 1941 at the Academy of Music. So he was a person who had a great deal of fame by this point in his life. People loved his music.
In December of 1939, he conducted the Philadelphia Orchestra, and this was the first time he has stood on a conductor's podium since 1917. His last appearance as a conductor in Russia. Also in late 1940 or 41, he was approached by the makers of the British film Dangerous Moonlight to write a short concerto-like piece to use in the film, but he declined. The job went to Richard Adinsel and the orchestrator Roy Douglas, who came up with the Warsaw Concerto. Sergei Rachmaninoff was also on the board of directors of the Tolstoy Foundation Center in Valley Cottage of New York. So even though Tolstoy told him he didn't like his music, he was still part of his foundation.
He was kind of everywhere in the world. I mean, really, the guy was everywhere. So one of his friends was a pianist by the name of Vladimir Horowitz. Or Vladimir Horowitz. So just as the Rachmaninoff household in the United States strove to reclaim the lost world of pre-revolutionary Russia, Rachmaninoff also sought the friendship and company of some really important Russian musical luminaries. In addition to Shchelyapin, he befriended the pianist Vladimir Horowitz in 1928. Their first meeting, arranged by Steinway, artist representative Alexander Greiner, took place in the basement of New York's Steinway Hall. On January 8 of 1929, 4 days prior to Horowitz's debut at Carnegie Hall, playing the Tchaikovsky First Piano Concerto. Rachmaninoff mentioned to Greiner that he intended to attend the concert and had heard positive things about Horowitz's playing of his own Third Piano Concerto. He expressed a desire to accompany Horowitz in a performance of it. For Horowitz, the opportunity represented a dream come true, as he described it, quote, "Rachmaninoff was the musical god of my youth. To think that this great man should accompany me in his own Third Concerto, this was the most unforgettable impression of my life. This was my real debut." So he clearly made quite the impression on young Vladimir Horowitz. If you ever want to know who this guy is, he's all over YouTube. He's one of those pianists that became very famous for being able to perform and, to interpret works without being very precise, but to be very emotional about it. I think it's probably what he's best known for. Really great guy.
Yeah. So Rachmaninoff, in a subsequent letter to Horowitz, offered praise and support to the pianist, but described Horowitz's tempos in the Tchaikovsky concerto as too fast, especially the cadenza. About the pianist's interpretation of Rachmaninoff's own third concerto, the composer said to Abraham Chasins that Horowitz swallowed it whole. He had the courage, the intensity, and the daring. Unquote. The men remained supportive of each other's works, each making a point of attending concerts given by the other. They regularly gave 2 piano recitals at the composer's home in Beverly Hills. The recitals, never recorded, are known to have included Rachmaninoff's second suite and two piano reduction of the symphonic dances.
So in 1940, with the composer's consent, Horowitz created a fusion of the 1913 original and the 1931 revised versions of Rachmaninoff's second piano sonata. Horowitz remained a champion of Rachmaninoff's solo works and his third concerto, about which Rachmaninoff remarked publicly after August of 1942, after the performance at Hollywood Bowl. He said this, "This is the way I always dreamed my concerto should be played, but I never expected to hear it that way on earth." So clearly Rachmaninoff thinks very highly of Horowitz. Very good.
Yeah. So Rachmaninoff fell ill during a concert tour in late 1942 and was subsequently diagnosed with advanced melanoma. His family was informed, but he was not. On February 1st of 1943, he and his wife became American citizens. His last recital, given on February 17th of 1943 at the Alumni Gymnasium of the University of Tennessee in Knoxville, included Chopin's Piano Sonata No. 2, which contains that famous funeral march. A statue called Rachmaninoff's Last Concert, designed and sculpted by Victor Bokharev, now stands in World Fair Park in Knoxville as a permanent tribute to Rachmaninoff. He became so ill after this recital that he had to return to his home in Los Angeles. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to talk about Rachmaninoff too, because I went to this statue and it's pretty cool. It's pretty cool there in Knoxville.
Yeah, you live pretty darn close to that statue. That's kind
Oh yeah, I live like 5 minutes away.
So Rachmaninoff died of melanoma on 28th of March of 1943 in Beverly Hills, California, just 4 days before his 70th birthday. So and at his funeral, a choir sang his all-night vigil. Very well-known piece, has some very low notes in it. I think it has a low B flat at one point. He had wanted to be buried at the Villa Senior, which was his estate in Switzerland, but the conditions of World War II made fulfilling this request quite impossible. He was therefore interred on the 1st of June in Kensico Cemetery in Valhalla, New York. So Rachmaninoff is one of the very few A-list composers who actually made it to Valhalla at the end of his life.
Wagner didn't.
That's right. Poor Wagner.
So, in August of 2015, Russia announced its intentions to seek a reburial of Rachmaninoff's remains in Russia, claiming that Americans have neglected the composer's grave while attempting to shamelessly privatize his name. The composer's descendants have resisted this idea, pointing out that he died in the U.S. after spending decades outside of Russia in self-imposed political exile. Yep, so there you go.
Yeah, so after Rachmaninoff's death, the poet Miethe Shaginyan published 15 of the apparently many letters that that exchanged between her first contacting him in February of 1912 and their final meeting in July of 1917. Although she had signed her letters simply Rachmaninoff as R.E., Rachmaninoff had fairly quickly discovered her identity. The nature of Shaginyan and Rachmaninoff's relationship bordered on romantic, but was primarily intellectual and emotional. Though emotional cheating is cheating, no. So anyway, Shaginyan and the poetry she shared with Rachmaninoff during their correspondence has been cited as the inspiration for the 6 songs that make up Rachmaninoff's 38th opus. So it's yet another facet of his personal life there. Yeah. Shaginyan sounds like a good Armenian lady.
Yeah, in this relationship, kind of like Nadezhda von Meck with Tchaikovsky,
Yeah, minus all the money.
True, true. So let's talk a little bit about his works. So Rachmaninoff wrote 5 works for piano and orchestra, 4 concertos, and number 1 in F sharp minor, opus 1, was composed in 1891 but revised in 1917. His Concerto Number 2 in C minor, Opus 18, written between 1900 and 1901. Concerto Number 3 in D minor, Opus 30, written in 1909. And Concerto Number 4 in G minor, Opus 40, written in 1926 but revised in 1928 and again in 1941. Plus the Rhapsody on a Theme of Paganini. Of course, this work.
Which is basically a concerto.
Yeah, basically.
It's just without the concerto form.
Name,
It's
yeah.
a series of variations.
And of these concertos, the second and third are his most popular.
So Rachmaninoff also composed a number of works for orchestra alone, without the piano. The three symphonies, number 1 in D minor, Opus 13, was written in 1895. Number 2 in E minor was written in 1907, and number 3 in A minor, which was written between 35 and 36. Those are opuses 13, 27, and 44, respectively. So why these spaced chronologically? The symphonies represent 3 distinct phases in his compositional development. The second has been his most popular of the 3 since its first performance. It just has very canonical tunes. People hear it all the time. So other orchestral works include The Rock, which is his Opus 7, Caprice Bohemien, Opus 12, and The Isle of the Dead, which was Opus 29, and the Symphonic Dances, Opus 45. If you memorize all the opus numbers of Rachmaninoff, you can really impress people at bars.
That's true. And I love this symphonic poem, The Isle of the Dead. It's really good work. I really like that work. Works for piano solo include the 24 preludes traversing all 24 major and minor keys. His prelude in C sharp minor, Opus 3, number 2, from Morceau de Fantasie, Opus 3. 10 preludes in Opus 23, and 13 preludes in Opus 32. Especially difficult are the 2 sets of Etudes Tableau, Opus 33 and 39, which are very demanding study pictures. Stylistically, Opus 33 harkens back to the preludes, while Opus 39 shows the influence of Scriabin and Prokofiev. There are also six movement musicaux, which is Opus 16, also the variations on a theme of Chopin, Opus 22, and the variations on a theme of Corelli, Opus 42. He wrote 2 piano sonatas, both of which are large-scale and virtuosic in their technical demands. Rachmaninoff also composed works for 2 pianos, 4 hands, including 2 suites, the first subtitled Fantasie Tableau, a version of the Symphonic Dances, Opus 45, and an arrangement of the C-sharp minor prelude, as well as the Russian Rhapsody, and he arranged his first symphony for piano in 4 hands. Both these works were published posthumously.
So Rachmaninoff wrote 2 major a cappella choral works. The one that no one knows about, called the Liturgy of St. John Chrysostom. People do know the Chrysostom. People do know that one, but they sure know the All-Night Vigil a lot better. This is also known as the Vespers. It was the 5th movement of All-Night Vigil that Rachmaninoff requested to have sung at his funeral. Other choral works include a choral symphony, the Bells, what's the name of the choral symphony? The Cantata Spring, the 3 Russian songs, and an early concerto for choir, which was a cappella. The All-Night Vespers, probably the best known movement of that is Bogorodice Dievu, the Ave Maria that people always sing at Christmas time. Wonderful piece.
So he also completed 3 operas. All were really short. Allegro of 1892, sorry, the Miserly Night of 1903, and Francesca da Rimini of 1904. He started 3 others, notably Mona Vanna, based on a work by Maurice Maeterlinck. Copyright in this had been extended to the composer's favor, and through the restrictions did not pertain to Russia, Rachmaninoff dropped the project after completing Act 1 in piano vocal score in 1908. This act was orchestrated in 1984 by Igor Bukhtov and performed in the U.S. Allegro is regularly performed and has been recorded complete at least 8 times, and filmed as well. The Miserly Night adheres to Pushkin's Little Tragedy. Francesca da Rimini exists somewhat in the shadow of the familiar, though entirely different, Sanodai opera of that name.
Yeah, so Riccardo's Tandonai, really, I think, a pretty obscure Italian composer from the early 20th century. I was quite unfamiliar with the guy. So he also had written a Francesca di Rimini, I believe. So yeah, it's entirely different work though than Rachmaninoff's. So his chamber music, Rachmaninoff's chamber music includes two piano trios, both of which are named Trio Elegiac, the second of which is a memorial tribute to Tchaikovsky and a cello sonata. He also composed many songs for voice and piano to text by A.N. Tolstoy, Pushkin, Goethe, Shelley, Hugo, and Chekhov, among others. Among his most popular songs is the wordless Vocalise, which, there are whole albums of different arrangements of that piece. I know of a single album that just has that tune over and over again, every track with a different version of it. But I think my favorite Vocalise is Clara Rockmore on the theremin, since her birthday was last week. Everybody loves the first electronic instrument, the theremin.
Yeah. Yes, it's pretty cool, actually.
Yeah. The Vocalise is often done on the theremin. Wonderful instrument. Oh, yeah. Works for pretty much every instrument. So Vocalise, well noted. So yeah.
All right, so let's talk about his style. Rachmaninoff's style showed initially the influence of Tchaikovsky, beginning in the mid-1980s. His composition began showing a more individual tone. His first symphony has many original features. Its brutal gestures and uncompromising power of expression were unprecedented in Russian music at the time. Its flexible rhythms, sweeping lyricism, and stringent economy of thematic material were all features he kept and refined in subsequent works. After the three follow years following the poor reception of the symphony, Rachmaninoff's style began developing significantly. He started leaning towards sumptuous harmonies and broadly lyrical, often passionate melodies. His orchestration became subtle and more varied, with textures carefully contrasted, and his writing, on the whole, became more concise.
Especially important is Rachmaninoff's use of unusually widely spaced chords for bell-like sounds, something that really only he and a few other people can physically do on a piano.
Yeah,
because Rachmaninoff had
huge hands.
Enormous hands. If you haven't seen it, you should go on YouTube and look at Rachmaninoff's big hands. There's a YouTube video of somebody who's crafted big wooden sheets that they just grab and throw on the piano to hit the chords that Rachmaninoff did without having to roll it across. So that is. But anyways, so having these widely spaced chords for bell-like sounds occurs in many pieces, such as his choral symphony, The Bells, the second piano concerto, the E-flat major Etude Tableau, and the B minor prelude. Quote, "It is not enough to say that the church bells of Novgorod, St. Petersburg, and Moscow influenced Rachmaninoff and feature prominently in his music. This much is evident. What is extraordinary is the variety of bell sounds and breadth of structural and other functions they fulfill," unquote, from a scholar talking about it. So he was also fond of Russian Orthodox chants, C-H-A-N-T-S. He used them most perceptively in his Vespers, but many of his melodies found their origins in these chants. The opening melody of the First Symphony is derived from these chants. The opening melody of the Third Piano Concerto, on the other hand, is not derived from chants. When asked, Rachmaninoff simply said, "It had written itself," unquote. Rachmaninoff's frequently used motives include the Dies Irae, often of just the fragments of the first phrase. Rachmaninoff had great command of counterpoint and fugal writing, thanks to his studies with Taneyev. And the above-mentioned occurrence of the Dies Irae in the Second Symphony is but a small example of this. Very characteristic of his writings is chromatic counterpoint, something I'm sure he probably picked up from listening to Prokofiev and Shostakovich. This talent is paired with a confidence in writing in both large and small-scale forms. The Third Piano Concerto especially shows a structural ingenuity, while each of the preludes grows from a tiny melodic or rhythmic fragment into a taut, powerfully evocative miniature, crystallizing a particular mood or sentiment while employing a complexity of texture, rhythmic flexibility, and lots of good, crunchy, chromatic harmony.
Yeah. His compositional style had already begun changing before the October Revolution deprived him of his homeland. The harmonic writing in The Bells, composed in 1913 but not published until 1920, became as advanced as in any of the works Rachmaninoff would write in Russia, partly because the melodic material has a harmonic aspect which arises from its chromatic ornamentation. Further changes are apparent in the revised First Piano Concerto, which he finished just before leaving Russia. as well as the Opus 38 song and Opus 39 Etude Tableau. In both these sets, Rachmaninoff was less concerned with pure melody than with coloring. His near-impressionist style perfectly matched the text by symbolist poets. The Opus 39 Etude Tableau are among the most demanding pieces he wrote for any medium, both technically and in the sense that the player must see beyond any technical challenges to a considerable array of emotions, then unify all these aspects.
So the composer's friend, Vladimir Wilshaw, noticed this compositional change continuing in the early 1930s, with the difference between the sometimes very extroverted Opus 39 Etude Tableau, the composer had broken a string on the piano at one performance, and the variations on the theme of Corelli. The variations show an even greater textural clarity than the Opus 38 songs, combined with a more abrasive use of chromatic harmony and a new rhythmic incisiveness. This would be characteristic of all his later works. The Piano Concerto No. 4, Opus 40, 1926, is composed in a more emotionally introverted style with a greater clarity of texture. Nevertheless, some of his most beautiful, and by that I mean both nostalgic and melancholy melodies, occur in the Third Symphony, Rhapsody on a Theme by Paganini, and Symphonic Dancing.
So, his reputation as a composer generated a variety of opinions before his music gained steady recognition across the world. In the 1954 edition of the Groove Dictionary of Music and Musicians notoriously dismissed Rachmaninoff's music as monotonous in texture, consisting mainly of artificial and gushing tunes, unquote, and predicted that his popular success was not likely to last. To this, Harold Schoenberg, in his Life of the Great Composers, responded, quote, "It is one of the most outrageously snobbish and even stupid statements ever to be found in a work that is supposed to be an objective reference," unquote. So there you go. That's funny.
Well, he did have some degree of reputation after he was no more. The Conservatoire Rachmaninoff in Paris, as well as streets in Veliki Novgorod, which is close to his birthplace, and Tambov, are named after the composer. In 1986, well, just a year before I was born, the Moscow Conservatory dedicated a concert hall on its premises to Rachmaninoff, dedicating the 252-seat auditorium Rachmaninoff Hall. A monument to Rachmaninoff was unveiled in Veliki Novgorod near his birthplace on June 14, 2009, which, not too long ago at all. I believe I was in Orlando on that day, I remember.
Wow.
Crazy.
That's good memory. Yeah, and actually, when I was, because one of the teachers here told me about the statue of Rachmaninoff that I didn't know was in Knoxville, and he told me that supposedly that was the only statue of Rachmaninoff in the world. And I googled a little bit, and yeah, I mean, it was the only statue of Rachmaninoff until 2009, until this monument was done to him. So let's
All
talk
it
about.
takes is someone to make another statue.
That's right. So Rachmaninoff ranked among the finest pianists of his time, along with Godowsky, Friedman, Rosenthal, Joseph Levine, and Joseph Hoffman. And he was famed for possessing a clean and virtuosic technique. His playing was marked by precision, rhythmic drive, notable use of staccato, and the ability to maintain clarity when playing works with complex textures. Rachmaninoff applied these qualities in music by Chopin, including the B-flat minor sonata. Rachmaninoff's repertory, excepting his own works, consisted mainly of standard 19th century virtuoso works, plus music by Bach, Beethoven, Borodin, Debussy, Grieg, Liszt, Mendelssohn, Mozart, Schubert, Schumann, and Tchaikovsky.
So, like I said before, Rachmaninoff possessed extremely large hands. This doesn't mean anything; it has no real implication on any other part of his body. But but he could use these hands to easily maneuver through the most complex chordal configurations. It was kind of outrageous how large his hands were. So his left-hand technique was unusually powerful. His playing was marked by definition, where other pianists' playing became blurry sounding from overuse of the pedal or deficiencies in finger technique. Rachmaninoff's textures are always crystal clear. He had a pretty good, clean idea of how to do things with all those really long fingers of his. So, as part of his daily warm-up exercises, Rachmaninoff would play the technically difficult Etude in A flat, Opus 1, number 2, attributed to Paul de Schleutzer. So, I mean, that's quite a difficult Etude to manage, at least every morning.
Yeah. Yeah, Rachmaninoff also possessed an uncanny memory, one that would help to put him in good stead with when he had to learn the standard piano repertory as a 45-year-old exile. He could hear a piece of music, even a symphony, and then play it back the next day, the next year, or a decade after that. Zilotti would give him a long and demanding piece to learn, such as Brahms' variation on a theme by Handel. 2 days later, Rachmaninoff would play it with complete artistic finish. Alexander Goldweiser said, whatever compositions was ever mentioned, piano, orchestra, operatic, or other, by a classical or contemporary composer, if Rachmaninoff had at any time heard it, and most of all, if he liked it, he played it as though it were a work he had studied throughoutly. So really good memory.
Oh yeah, I mean, and Goldenweiser was a pretty important dude. He taught piano. He's a pianist over there in Russia. He was the reason I know him is just because he was the teacher of Nikolai Kapustin, the great jazz Ukrainian composer. Maybe one day we'll talk about Kapustin. He doesn't do a lot of symphonic stuff. If he does, there's no like jazz band. Anyway, along with his musical gifts, Rachmaninoff possessed physical gifts that may have placed him in good stead as a pianist. These gifts, of course, included exceptional height and extremely large hands with a gigantic finger stretch. He could play the chord C, E flat, G, C, G with his left hand. That is,
That's crazy.
his hand is reaching an octave and a fifth while playing the third, the fifth, and the root with
That's
his
crazy.
other three fingers. That's an enormous hand.
Yeah.
That's the left hand we're talking about. So this, and the same with the right, just, backwards. So this and Rachmaninoff's slender frame, long limbs, narrow head, prominent ears, and thin nose suggest that he may have had a Marfan syndrome, a hereditary disorder of the connective tissue. This syndrome would have accounted for several minor ailments he suffered all his life, including back pain, arthritis, eye strain, and bruising of the fingertips. Although others have pointed out that this is more likely because he was playing the piano all day long. This Marfan speculation was proposed by Dr. D.A.B. Young, formerly the principal scientist of the Wellcome Foundation, in a 1986 British Medical Journal article. But as a musicologist, we always have to be very careful about posthumous diagnosis.
Yeah.
It's always a really bad idea.
Yeah.
Not only for that, but there's just no way of testing these things. You just
Exactly.
get talking in the wind.
Yeah, you
It's
can
like
now.
It's like saying Mozart had ADD.
Yeah.
Well, he probably did, but we have no way of
Who knows?
knowing. And
That's
our
right.
conception of ADD will change over the years.
Yep. So we arrive at the piece we're going to be talking about today, which is his Symphony No. 2 in E minor, Opus 27, and this is his most famous. It's probably one of his most famous symphonies. I prefer. I mean, he only has 3, right? But I personally like his 3 a little better. But these are both great works. His second and third symphony are really good. So this was written between 1906 and 1907. I think we said that before. And the premiere was conducted by the composer himself in St. Petersburg on the February 8th of 1908. Its duration is approximately an hour when performed uncut. Cut performances can be as short as 35 minutes. The score is dedicated to Sergei Rachmaninoff, the composer, teacher, theorist, and author, who was a pupil of Tchaikovsky. Alongside his Piano Concerto No. 3, this symphony remains one of the composer's best known compositions. So yeah, I mean, that's when I read this, it said that you can cut the performance if you want to, and a lot of conductors do that. They cut, especially in operas, right? In operas, conductors usually cut things to make things a little shorter, but I mean that's not done as much in symphonic pieces, So it's kind of interesting to know that actually there are conductors out there that are cutting these composers' symphonies into shorter works.
Yeah, we tend to kind of sacralize or to sort of idealize these symphonic works, so we're afraid of cutting it apart. But it's just music. It's designed to be enjoyed.
Yeah.
So at the time his Symphony No. 2 was composed, Rachmaninoff had 2 successful seasons as the conductor of the Imperial Opera at the Bolshoi Theater in Moscow. He considered himself first and foremost a composer and felt that the performance schedule was detracting from his time to compose. He moved his wife and infant daughter to Dresden, Germany, as we mentioned before, to spend more time composing and also to escape the political tumult that would put Russia on the path to revolution. Later on, not too much later, but later on. The family remained in Dresden for 3 years, spending summers at Rachmaninoff's in-laws' estate of Ivanovka.
It was during this time that Rachmaninoff wrote not only of his Second Symphony, but also of the tone poem Isle of the Dead. He wrote that during that period as well.
At the same time. So Rachmaninoff was not altogether convinced that he was a gifted symphonist. At its 1897 premiere, his Symphony No. 1, conducted by Glasinov, was considered another disaster. Criticism of it was so harsh that it sent the young composer in a bout of depression, like we said before. Even after the success of his Piano Concerto No. 2, Rachmaninoff, which won the Glinka Award and 500 rubles in 1904, so he made some money with that. So Rachmaninoff still lacked confidence in his writing. He was very unhappy with his first draft of his Second Symphony, but after months of revision, he finished the work and conducted the premiere in 1908 to great applause. The work earned him another Glinka Award 10 months later. The triumph regained Rachmaninoff's sense of self-worth as a symphony. So he gained his confidence back with this symphony.
Oh yes, but due to its formidable length, Symphony No. 2 was subjected to many revisions, particularly in the late 1940s and 50s. This reduced the piece from nearly an hour to 35 minutes, as we said before. You can cut the mess out of it. So prior to 1970, the piece was usually performed in one of its revised versions. Though since then, orchestras have used the complete version almost exclusively, because now that he's dead, we have to worship the music.
Yeah.
That's the way it goes. Look at this masterpiece. We have to enjoy all 60 minutes of it. I mean, it's just music. Just enjoy it, right? So since then, orchestras have had the complete version. Since then, they've always done that. Though sometimes with the omission of a repeat in the first movement. So just to keep things going, they'll negate that repeat.
Well, that happens a lot.
Oh, yeah. Happens all the time. People hate rehearing things. People hate repetition in music. I mean, have you ever heard anything on the radio ever?
Oh, that's right.
Anyway, the manuscript of Rachmaninoff's Symphony No. 2 is owned by the Tabor Foundation and is on permanent loan to the British Library.
Yeah. So this symphony is scored it's for a full orchestra, of course, with 3 flutes, the third doubling on piccolo, 3 oboes, the third doubling on English horn, 2 clarinets in A and B flat, a bass clarinet in A and B flat, 2 bassoons, 4 horns, 3 trumpets, 3 trombones, a tuba, a timpani, a snare drum, a bass drum, a cymbals, a glockenspiel, and strings. So yeah, it's a big orchestra, so, normal for the time. The opening motto theme is played by the cellos and basses and is repeated throughout the symphony. The symphony is in 4 movements. The first movement is Largo, Allegro moderato in E minor, so it's got an introduction. Then the second movement is Allegro molto in A minor. The third movement is Adagio in A major, and the last movement is Allegro vivace in E major.
The first movement begins with a slow introduction in which the motto theme of the symphony is introduced and developed. This leads to an impassioned climax, after which an English horn solo leads the movement into the allegro and sonata form. Assuming the symphony is performed uncut, this also includes a full repeat of the exposition. In contrast to the exposition, the development is stormy at times and moves through multiple key centers. Only the first subject and central motto theme are used in the development. After a long dominant pedal, the music slowly transitions to the recapitulation in E major, in which only the second subject is recapitulated, but is heavily expanded on compared to the exposition. This device of omitting the first subject from the recap was also used by Tchaikovsky in the second, fourth, and sixth symphonies. And then he ends it with a coda in E minor, which concludes the movement quite loudly. So that's just a little bit of history. Yeah, it's just interesting. So it did follow a pretty clear sonata form, except it doesn't have the first theme at the end of the recap, which is just bizarre to be.
Yeah, very
I guess if you're in a culture that deletes the repetition of the exposition, you might as well just never hear the theme again. Whatever. What's the point anyway, right?
That's fun. So the second movement is really only resemble. So the second movement really only resembles a scherzo insofar as it relates to the early to mid-romantic tradition of symphonic movements, and its use of a typical scherzo form, A B A C A B A. The movement in A minor opens with a lively ostinato in the upper strings, as a fixture in large-scale works by Rachmaninoff. The Dies Irae plainchant is referenced here, and in the opening bars by the horn. The B section is a lyrical cantabile melody in C major, The central trio section notably begins with the sudden tutti fortissimo chord and is an example of Rachmaninoff's mastery of counterpoint and fugal writing, thanks to his studies with Taneyev, to whom his symphony is dedicated. At the conclusion of the movement, the dies irae is again stated, this time by a brass choir. The movement ends pianissimo, and in contrast to the first movement.
Pianissimo.
That's right.
Pianissimo. Pianissimo. So anyway, this movement is in the third movement, I should say, the one after the second. The third movement is in a broad three-part form and is often remembered for its opening theme, which is played by the first violins and restated both as a melody and as an accompanying figure later on in the movement. This opening theme, however, is really an introduction to the main melody of the movement, which is presented by a lengthy clarinet solo and is a typical Rachmaninoff creation, circling around single notes and accompanied by rich harmony. The second part of the movement is based on the initial motto theme of the symphony, and in many ways is a direct complement to the introduction of the first movement, leading to an impassioned climax in C major. After a transition back to the opening theme, the central melody of the movement is restated, this time played by the first violins, while fragments of the opening theme are heard in the accompaniment. The movement concludes in a tranquil way, dying away slowly in the strings.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And the final movement, the fourth movement, is set in sonata form, just like the first one. And the lively fanfare-like first theme is played by the entire orchestra, leading into a march-like interlude played by the woodwinds. After the return of the first theme, the first subject is concluded and transitions directly into a massive, broad melody played by the strings. After dying down to pianissimo, the third movement is briefly recalled. Following this, the development section begins, which is in two sections. The first of which introduces new melodic ideas, and the latter of which resolves around a descending scale. The recapitulation initially only presents the first subject before moving into a dominant pedal, building up to the triumphant restatement of the broad melody, in which fragments of the entire theme, motto theme, and descending scale can be heard in the accompaniment. An emphatic coda brings the symphony to a close, concluding with another fixture to Rachmaninoff's large-scale works, the characteristic four-note rhythm ending. In this case, presented in triplet rhythm, also heard in his cello sonata, second and third piano concertos, and in an altered form in his fourth piano concerto, and also in symphonic dances. So he's got his stroke that he's gonna use here at the end.
Oh,
And there you go. We've talked about Rachmaninoff and his second symphony. Is there anything else you want to say, Andrew?
no, I think we've just about covered everything there is to know about Rachmaninoff.
Yeah, especially his. I mean, we said everything that we need to know about his life. He was pretty extensive.
Oh yeah, he's sort of another Forrest Gump character. Just sort of saw
Yeah.
everything.
And yeah, I mean, I wanted to talk about him since we were all about, Tennessee last week. All right.
I mean last week. You mean earlier today?
Oh yeah, that's right. All right. Well, of course, thank you again for listening. And if you can find us on iTunes and your favorite podcast apps, if you have a phone, of course. You can also find us on YouTube, where we put the videos and with all the annotations and all that and all those things. Of course, you can email us at symphonypodcast@gmail.com if you want to ask any questions or anything like that. And until next time, thank you for listening.
Thank you for listening.
Voy a...
Yay.